that had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years. No one remembered a time before them. No one dared to imagine a time after. They were nightmares given flesh. 8 limbs covered in armor harder than starship hulls, claws that could tear through metal like paper, eyes that saw in spectrums other species could not even imagine. But their most terrifying feature was not their bodies, it was their minds. The shared one consciousness. Billions of warriors, thousands of ships, all controlled by a single vast intelligence called the throne mind. When one saw something, all of them knew. When the throne mind gave an order, every warrior obeyed instantly. There was no confusion, no hesitation, no mercy. They had consumed over 400 intelligent species, entire civilizations reduced to food and raw materials, worlds stripped bare, populations harvested. They did not conquer. They did not negotiate. They simply ate everything in their path and moved on to the next meal. The galaxy had learned to fear the red ships that appeared without warning. Most species surrendered immediately, hopping for a quick death. Others tried to run, but there were patient hunters. A few brave civilizations had tried to fight. Their worlds now floated as dead rocks in empty space, monuments to the foolishness of resistance. This was the galaxy that humanity was about to enter. Admiral Kern stood on the bridge of the UEC Endeavour and stared at the stars. He was 63 years old, with gray hair cut short and a face marked by decades of hard service. He had fought in the Mars rebellions. He had lost friends in the Titan crisis. He had seen humanity at its worst and its best. But nothing had prepared him for what he was about to learn. The Endeavour was humanity's pride, the first ship capable of true deep space exploration. For 3 years, they had traveled beyond the edges of mapped space, searching for signs of intelligent life. Humanity had always wondered if they were alone in the universe. They were about to get their answer. "Admiral, we're picking up a signal," Lieutenant said from her station. "It's weak, very old, but it's definitely artificial." Kern walked closer to her screen. The signal pulsed in a strange pattern, repeating over and over. Even without translation, he could feel something in it, something desperate. "Can we decode it?" Worked her controls for several minutes. The ship's computers analyzed the signal, breaking down its components, searching for patterns. Finally, words appeared on the screen. Broken, fragmented, but clear enough. "Warning, they come, hide, they consume all, no hope, run." The bridge fell silent. Every officer stopped what they were doing and stared at the message. "What the hell is a?" Commander Hayes asked. Before anyone could answer, the sensors screamed with alerts. Something was approaching, something big. They were not warships, they were not predators, they were survivors. The Covenant of Remnants consisted of 12 species. Each one was the last of their kind. Each one had escaped by hiding in the darkest corners of space, in places too cold and empty for the hunters to bother searching. They had found each other over thousands of years, forming a fragile alliance of the broken and forgotten. Their leader was Sara, a being made of living crystal that pulsed with soft blue light. She was ancient beyond human understanding. She had watched her home world burn when humanity's ancestors were still learning to make fire. When she spoke, her voice was like wind chimes in a storm. "You are the ones from the spiral's edge," she said, studying the human officers with eyes that had seen too much death. "We have waited for you." Admiral Kern did not understand. "Waited for us? We didn't even know you existed until 10 minutes ago." Sora made a sound that might have been laughter or might have been grief. "There is a prophecy among our people, old words passed down from the first fallen. They said that when all hope was lost, when the darkness had consumed everything, a new species would come from the edge of the spiral arm. The untamed, they called them, beings of chaos and fire, and they would do what no one else could." "Which is what?" "They would teach them to fear." The next several hours were the worst of Kern's life. Sara and the remnant ambassadors explained everything. The history of the thousands of species consumed, the impossibility of resistance. They showed footage of conquered worlds, of harvesting operations, of things that made hardened soldiers look away and cover their mouths. And then they showed him why they had come. Your species has been broadcasting electromagnetic signals into space for over 400 years, Sora said. Television, radio, military communications. They detected these signals approximately 20 of your years ago. Kern felt his stomach drop. They know we're here. They know exactly where you are. A consumption fleet was dispatched immediately upon detection. The crystal being's light flickered. Based on standard travel speeds, they will reach your home system in approximately 18 of your months. 18 months. Less than 2 years before the most feared species in the galaxy arrived at Earth's doorstep with the intention of eating every human alive. How many ships? Kern asked. His voice was steady, his hands were not. 10,000. Commander Hayes swore quietly. We have maybe 200 combat-capable vessels in our entire fleet. How are we supposed to fight 10,000? Sora turned her ancient eyes to the commander. You are not supposed to fight. You are supposed to run, hide, find some dark corner of space where they will not look. It is what we did. It is why we still exist. And how many of your people survived by running? The crystal being was silent for a long moment. Less than 1% of 1%. Admiral Kern looked at the holographic map that floated in the center of the room. It showed the consumption fleet as a wave of red, sweeping across the galaxy toward a single blue dot. Earth, his home, 8 billion people, everything humanity had ever built. He thought about his children. The billions of families who were going about their lives at this very moment, completely unaware that extinction was coming. And something inside him changed. We're not running, he said. Every eye in the room turned to him. Sora's crystal body flickered with something that might have been hope or might have been pity. Admiral, she said gently, no species has ever successfully resisted not once in 12,000 years. What makes you think humanity will be different? Kern smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had just realized that fear was a choice. Because we're too stupid to know when we've lost, he said, and too stubborn to care. We have 18 months to do what no one has done in 12,000 years. We fight back. We make them bleed. And we show this galaxy that they can be beaten. He turned to his crew, his voice rising with conviction. Send a message to Earth. Tell them everything. Tell them what's coming. And tell them to start building weapons, because we're going to need every single one of them. The war for humanity's survival had begun. The throne mind stretched across 3 planets, living neural tissue connected by tendrils that spanned millions of kilometers of empty space. It was the largest single consciousness in the known galaxy. It had lived for 12,000 years. It had consumed civilizations that had built wonders beyond imagination. It was, by any reasonable measure, a god. And for the first time in 8,000 years, it was curious. The new species had been detected in the spiral arm, small, young. Their technology was primitive compared to what the throne mind had seen before. Their population was concentrated on a single world. By all calculations, the consumption should take approximately 72 standard hours, a minor meal, barely worth the effort of sending a fleet. But the throne mind was patient. It sent scouts ahead as it always did, small ships to observe and report, to test the prey's responses, to ensure there would be no surprises. The scouts never reported back. On Earth, the news had spread like fire. Every government, every military, every civilian had seen the transmission from Admiral Kern. They knew what was coming. And in a way that surprised even the most cynical observers, humanity united. Old enemies became allies overnight. Nations that had been pointing weapons at each other for decades suddenly found themselves sharing intelligence, resources, and soldiers. The Coalition Emergency Protocol was activated. Every factory on Earth switched to military production. Every scientist was assigned to weapons research. Every able-bodied person was given a choice: fight or support those who fight. Almost everyone chose to fight. Doctor was one of the scientists. She was 42 years old, who had spent her career studying theoretical alien life. Now she was studying actual alien corpses. The remnants had provided samples. Dead warriors preserved from ancient battles, worked 20-hour days, cutting apart the nightmarish creatures, analyzing their biology, searching for weaknesses. She found something interesting. The hive mind is their greatest strength, she explained to the assembled military commanders. But it is also a potential weakness. Each individual is connected to the throne mind through a neural link. They share thoughts, sensations, orders. It makes them incredibly coordinated. How is that a weakness? General asked. Smiled. It was the smile of a scientist who had found something beautiful in the data. Because the connection goes both ways. When I experiences pain, the throne mind feels an echo of it. When I experiences confusion or fear, that emotion ripples through the network. Their communication is instantaneous, but so is their vulnerability to psychological disruption. You're saying we can hurt the throne mind by hurting individual warriors. I'm saying we can drive it insane by being unpredictable. The throne mind has consumed over 400 species. It has perfect records of how each one behaved. It knows exactly how prey responds to threat. It calculates the most efficient hunting strategies based on these patterns. She pulled up a display showing complex mathematical models. But what happens when the prey doesn't follow the patterns? What happens when the prey does something completely irrational? The room was silent as the implication sank in. You want us to be crazy, Admiral Kern said. I want you to be human, replied, which from a perspective might be the same thing. The first scout arrived in the Sol system 4 months later. It was a small vessel designed for speed and observation. Its purpose was simple: observe the prey, calculate their defensive capabilities, and report back to the consumption fleet. It expected to find a primitive species huddled on their planet, waiting for death. Instead, it found miners. The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter was humanity's industrial heart. Thousands of mining ships worked there, extracting metals and minerals from the floating rocks. When the war began, these miners had been given a choice: evacuate to Earth or stay and fight. Most of them stayed. They had welded weapons onto their mining ships. Designed to break apart asteroids were now pointed at the stars. Explosive charges meant for controlled demolitions were now attached to remote-controlled drones. These were not military vessels. These were desperate people with tools and a refusal to die quietly. The scout detected them and immediately dismissed them as irrelevant. Civilian vessels posed no threat to technology. It continued its observation mission. This was a mistake. The first attack came from behind. A mining drone, flying dark and silent, slammed into the scout's engine section at 12 kilometers per second. The scout survived, but its propulsion was damaged. Before it could send a distress signal, 3 more drones hit it from different angles. And then the miners came. They swarmed the crippled scout like angry hornets. Their weapons were crude, but there were dozens of them, and they attacked from every direction at once. The scout's defensive systems were designed for conventional combat. They were not designed for suicidal attacks by vessels that should have been running away. When the scout finally exploded, the miners cheered. It was humanity's first victory against the. It would not be the last. The throne mind received the scout's final transmission: fragmented images of primitive ships attacking with reckless abandon. The data was analyzed. The conclusion was troubling. The prey had not run. They had not surrendered. They had not even tried to negotiate. They had attacked. This was not normal behavior. Prey species ran or surrendered. They did not throw themselves at superior predators with improvised weapons and no regard for their own survival. The throne mind searched its vast memory banks, looking for similar patterns. It found nothing. For the first time in 8,000 years, It encountered something it could not predict. More scouts were sent. More scouts were destroyed. Each battle provided new data, and each piece of data was more confusing than the last. The humans did not fight like rational beings. They used tactics that made no strategic sense. They sacrificed themselves in ways that should have been impossible for intelligent creatures. A scout cornered a human transport ship near Jupiter's moons. The transport should have surrendered. Instead, it accelerated directly toward the scout, collision course locked. The human captain broadcast a single message before impact: "See you in hell, bug." Another scout detected a small human vessel hiding in Saturn's rings. When the scout approached, the vessel detonated. The humans had loaded it with nuclear weapons. They had killed themselves just to take one scout with them. The throne mind began to experience an unfamiliar sensation. It was not fear. The throne mind had never felt fear, but it was something close, a growing unease, a suspicion that this consumption might not be as simple as expected. When the full consumption fleet arrived in the Sol system, the throne mind broadcast a message to Earth. It was a formality, the same message it had sent to 400 species before, words designed to break the prey's spirit before the harvest began. "You have amused us, small ones. Your resistance has been noted. It is meaningless. We have consumed civilizations that were old when your species was still learning to walk upright. We have broken empires that span galaxies. You are insects. You are food. Now you will feed us." The throne mind expected silence in response, or perhaps begging. These were the usual reactions. What it received was Admiral Kern's voice, broadcast on every human frequency, calm and cold and absolutely certain. "Come and take it." 10,000 warships hung in the darkness beyond Neptune, the largest fleet ever assembled for a single consumption, enough firepower to crack planets and boil oceans. And between them and Earth stood a species that had been spacefaring for barely 300 years, a species that, by every logical calculation, had already lost. But the throne mind was beginning to understand something. Logic did not apply to humans. They were not rational. They were not predictable. They were something the galaxy had never seen before. They were trouble. The Battle of Sol was about to begin. The consumption fleet entered the Sol system expecting a quick harvest. 10,000 warships, billions of warriors, technology that had crushed civilizations for 12,000 years. They found a nightmare waiting for them. Humanity had spent 18 months preparing. Every planet, every moon, every rock in the solar system had been turned into a weapon. The expected prey huddled on there, waiting to be consumed. Instead, they found a solar system that had become a killing ground. Venus was first. The advanced fleet swept past the planet, ignoring it as irrelevant. Then the clouds opened up. Humanity had seeded Venus's atmosphere with billions of nanoscale acid bombs. When they detonated, the entire planet vomited caustic gas into space. 30 ships dissolved before they understood what was happening. Mars was next. The red planet had been fortified with every weapon humanity could build. Installations buried deep in the rock, powered by fusion reactors. Missile batteries hidden in ancient craters. And mines. Millions of mines, floating invisible in orbit, each one designed to attach to a hull and wait. They lost 200 ships before they reached the asteroid belt. And then things got worse. Captain Maria Santos was 34 years old. She had brown skin, black hair, and a smile that could light up a room or terrify an enemy. Before the war, she had been a cargo pilot, hauling supplies between Earth and Mars. Now she led They were not a normal military unit. They were volunteers who had agreed to the most insane mission in human history. Their job was simple: fly directly into carrier ships, crash through the hull, and deploy ground troops inside. Every mission was supposed to be suicide. The survival rate on paper was 0%. Somehow they kept coming back. "Listen up, you beautiful idiots," Santos said over the comm as her squadron approached a carrier. The ship was massive, 5 kilometers long, covered in organic armor that healed itself from damage. It had already destroyed 3 human destroyers. "We're going in through the engine section. Intelligence says the armor is thinner there. Once we breach, we have approximately 2 minutes before the internal defenses activate. In those 2 minutes, we need to deploy our ground teams and get out." Questions. "Captain," one of her pilots said, "they told us the last mission was impossible too, and the one before that." Santos grinned. "And we're still here. They have spent 12,000 years fighting logical enemies. They have never fought people who think dying for a good cause is acceptable. They have never fought people who laugh in the face of impossible odds. They have never fought us." She pushed her throttle forward. "Attack." The carriers never saw them coming. 14, flying dark, engines minimal, approaching from the shadow of Jupiter. They hit the engine section simultaneously. Santos felt her ship shudder as it punched through the organic armor. Emergency seals activated, keeping the air in. Around her, the other ships were doing the same. The interior of a carrier was like being inside a living creature. Walls of flesh and bone, fluids dripping from strange growths, and warriors. Thousands of warriors rushing toward the breach. The ground teams deployed. Human soldiers in powered armor, carrying weapons designed specifically for close-quarters combat against biology. Doctors' research had paid off. They knew where to shoot. They knew what would hurt. For 2 minutes, the inside of that carrier became hell. The throne mind watched through the eyes of its warriors as humans tore through them. It saw soldiers who should have been terrified instead laughing as they fought. It saw wounded humans refuse to die, continuing to fire until their bodies finally gave out. It saw a human throw himself onto a warrior with a live grenade, killing both of them and clearing a path for his companions. This was not normal prey behavior. This was madness. And it was working. The carrier's main reactor was destroyed. Santos and her surviving pilots extracted the ground teams and escaped as the massive ship began to die. Behind them, the carrier exploded, taking 2 nearby destroyers with it. They had lost 4, 63 soldiers dead. They counted it as a victory. The Battle of Saul lasted 3 months. It was the most brutal conflict in human history. Cities were destroyed, continents burned. The ocean boiled in places where weapons hit the water. 800 million people died. But humanity did not break. Every time they pushed forward, they found new resistance. The armies on Earth fought for every street, every building, every room. Civilians took up arms, grandmothers with rifles, children running messages through underground tunnels. The entire species had become an army. And slowly, impossibly, they began to lose. The throne mind could not understand what was happening. Its calculations said humanity should have surrendered after the first week. They were outmatched in every measurable way. Their technology was inferior. Their numbers were smaller. They had no chance of winning. But they kept fighting. The throne mind tried to adapt. It studied human tactics, looking for patterns it could exploit. But human tactics did not follow patterns. They changed constantly. What worked against one group of humans failed completely against another. Every time the throne mind thought it understood its prey, they did something unexpected. Worse, something was happening to the warriors themselves. Doctor psychological warfare was working better than anyone had hoped. The constant chaos, the unpredictable attacks, the refusal to behave rationally, it was disrupting the hive mind's coordination. Some warriors began hesitating before attacks. Others showed individual behaviors that had no strategic purpose. A few even tried to surrender. The throne mind was forced to isolate these corrupted units, cutting them off from the collective consciousness. But the problem kept spreading. Human behavior was infectious. Their chaos was spreading through the neural network like a virus. And then the remnants arrived. Sara had watched humanity stand from the edges of the solar system. She had expected them to die quickly, as every other species had. She had prepared evacuation routes for the few survivors she hoped to rescue. Instead, she had watched something impossible. She had watched humanity really hurt them. For the first time in 12,000 years, the monsters were bleeding. She sent a message to the other remnant species. Ships that had hidden began to move. Ancient weapons were brought out of storage. The broken and forgotten rose from the dark. They were done hiding. When the remnant fleet appeared on the flank, it was not large. A few hundred ships, old and battered and held together by hope. But they came screaming out of hyperspace with weapons blazing and a fury that had been building for thousands of years. They were caught between two forces, humanity in front, the remnants behind, and for the first time the throne mind gave an order it had never given before. Retreat. The consumption fleet, 5,000 ships remained from the original 10,000, half an armada destroyed by a species that should have been food, the greatest defeat in history. Admiral Kern stood on the bridge of his ship and watched the red dots retreat on his display. Earth was burning. Millions were dead. Humanity had paid a terrible price for this victory. But they had won. He opened a channel to all surviving human ships. "They came to our home," he said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion. "They came to eat us. They came believing we were prey." He looked at the tactical display, at the retreating enemy, at the vastness of space that lay beyond. "Now we show them what we really are. We're not prey, we're predators, and we're hungry." He turned to his navigation officer. "Set course for space. We're taking this war to them." The Battle of Saul was over. The hunt was about to begin. For 12,000 years they had known only one direction, forward. They consumed. They expanded. They took what they wanted. No species had ever pushed back. No fleet had ever entered their territory. Until now. The combined fleet crossed into space 3 months after the Battle of Saul. Human warships flew alongside remnant vessels. Ships that had once hunted each other now fought side by side. It was the largest military alliance in galactic history, and it had one purpose: end the threat forever. Admiral Kern stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, humanity's new flagship. The old ship had died protecting Earth. This one had been built from the wreckage of carriers, using alien technology modified with human creativity. It was ugly. It was brutal. It worked. "First target is he announced to his command staff. "Intelligence says 3 million are still alive, kept as slave workers for food production. We're getting them out." Commander Hayes studied the tactical display. The planet is protected by a defense grid, 200 orbital platforms, plus a garrison of at least 50,000 warriors. "Then we'll need to be creative." Kern turned to the holographic image of Sora, who led the remnant fleet from her own vessel. "Any suggestions from our allies?" The crystal being pulsed with soft light. They were once a proud species. They built cities that touched the clouds and ships that danced between stars. When they came, they fought for 300 years before finally falling. Her light flickered with something like pain. They never forgot how to fight. They simply had no weapons left to fight with. "So we give them weapons." That is the human way, is it not? To arm the helpless, to teach the broken how to stand again. Kern nodded. It's time they learned what happens when their food fights back. The liberation of Prime was the first of many. The human fleet dropped supplies and weapons to the enslaved population before the garrison could react. Within hours, the planet was in revolt. 3 million beings who had been treated as cattle for 3,000 years suddenly remembered what freedom tasted like. The garrison was overwhelmed, not by the human fleet but by themselves. Ancient warriors who had taught their children's children the old fighting techniques. Farmers who had hidden weapons in their fields for generations, waiting for a day that had finally come. When human soldiers finally landed to assist, they found the standing victorious among the bodies of their captors. The oldest among them, a being whose skin had turned gray with age, approached Admiral Kern with tears streaming down her face. "The prophecy was true," she said. "The Untamed came from the spiral's edge. You came." Kern helped her to her feet. "We're just getting started." Word of the liberation spread faster than light. The communication network, normally used to coordinate their attacks, now carried stories of their defeats. Slave populations on 100 worlds heard what had happened on Prime. Hope, a feeling that had been extinct in territory for, began to grow. The throne mind watched with growing horror as its empire started to crack. More worlds were liberated. More species joined the alliance. They found themselves fighting on 1,000 fronts at once. Their perfect coordination began to fail. Warriors who had never known fear started to hesitate. The hive mind, once a symphony of unified purpose, became discordant. Dr. Virus made things worse. She had spent months perfecting it during the Battle of Saul, a biological weapon designed specifically for neural tissue. It did not kill. It did something far more devastating. It severed the connection between individual and the throne mind. For a species that had never known individual thought, it was worse than death. The first isolated went insane. They screamed without the comfort of the collective. They clawed at their own heads, trying to find the connection that was no longer there. Most died within hours, their minds unable to cope with the silence. But some did not. Some discovered something they had never known, themselves. The first defector appeared 6 months into the campaign, a warrior who had been cut off from the hive mind during a battle and survived. Instead of trying to reconnect, it had chosen to remain separate. It had watched humans fight and die. It had seen their courage, their sacrifice, their strange habit of caring for each other as individuals rather than parts of a whole. It wanted to understand. The called itself. It surrendered to a human patrol group and asked to speak with their leaders. The soldiers almost killed it on sight, but Captain Santos, who had been promoted after the victories, stopped them. "Look at its eyes," she said. "There's something different." Looked at her. For the first time in its existence, it looked at a human not as prey, but as a person. "I want to learn," it said, its voice awkward from disuse. Communicated through the hive mind, they rarely spoke aloud. "I want to understand why you fight so hard, why you die for each other, why you smile even when you are dying." Santos studied the creature. 8 limbs, armor that had been designed to terrify, claws that had killed billions, and eyes that looked almost lost. "Come with us," she said. "We'll show you." Was not the only one. As the virus spread and more were cut off from the collective, some chose to surrender rather than fight. They were confused, broken, terrified of their new isolation, but they were also curious. For 12,000 years, they had known only the throne mind's purpose. Now they had to find their own. Some became allies. Others simply wanted to be left alone. A few tried to return to the hive mind, only to find that the throne mind rejected them. They were contaminated, infected with individuality. There was no going back. The throne mind responded to these defections with fury. Entire worlds were sterilized to prevent the virus from spreading. Billions of its own warriors were killed to stop the infection of individual thought. But it was like trying to stop water from flowing downhill. The more it fought, the more it lost. And through it all, the human fleet kept advancing. Admiral Kern lost his son during the assault on the shipyards. Lieutenant James Kern had been leading a boarding party when the ship he was on was destroyed. There was no body to recover, just another name on a list that grew longer every day. Kern stood alone in his quarters, staring at a photograph of his son as a child. The boy had been so full of life, so eager to prove himself, so desperate to make his father proud. He had died at 26, fighting monsters, 1 billion light-years from home. A knock came at his door. Kern did not answer. The door opened anyway. Stood in the entrance. The defector had been assigned to the Defiance after Santos vouched for it. Most of the crew still treated it with suspicion, but it had proven useful. It understood tactics better than any human could. Now it stood in the Admiral's doorway, holding something in its clawed hands. "Human food," said awkwardly. "I am told that eating together is a ritual of comfort among your species. I do not understand it, but I wish to offer." Kern stared at the creature. A year ago he would have killed it without hesitation. Now he was too tired for hate. "Sit down," he said. They ate in silence. Did not need human food, but it ate anyway, trying to understand, trying to learn. "Why do you fight?" asked finally. "Your son is dead. Your species has already lost millions. You could negotiate a surrender. The throne mind might accept." "No, it wouldn't, and even if it did, we wouldn't accept." Kern looked at the photograph again. "My son died fighting for something he believed in. If I stop now, his death means nothing. If I stop now, everyone who died means nothing." "I do not understand. They are dead. They cannot care anymore." "But I'm not dead, and I care." Kern met the eyes. "That's what your throne mind never understood about us. We don't fight because we think we'll win. We fight because fighting is right. We fight because giving up is worse than dying. We fight because that's who we are." Was silent for a long moment. Then it said something that surprised them both. "I think I would like to fight with you, for you, until the end." Kern nodded slowly. "Then welcome to humanity. We're glad to have you." The fleet reached the edge of the Throne Mind's core systems 2 months later. The final battle was coming. 12,000 years of tyranny were about to end. And humanity would be there to finish it. The Throne Mind's home system was the most terrifying thing humanity had ever seen. 3 planets connected by tendrils of living neural tissue that spanned millions of kilometers. The heart of an empire that had consumed civilizations for 12,000 years. A god made of flesh and hate and hunger. And standing against it was a fleet of survivors, humans, remnants, defectors, species that had every reason to hate each other, united against something they hated more. Admiral Kern looked at the tactical display and felt the weight of history pressing down on him. Billions of souls across the galaxy were watching, hopping, praying to whatever gods they believed in. "All ships, this is Admiral Kern." His voice was calm. He had made peace with death a long time ago. "What we do today will echo through eternity. 12,000 years ago they began their reign of terror. Today we end it. Not for glory, not for revenge, but because it is right. Because no one should live in fear. Because every sentient being deserves the chance to be free." He paused, looking at the faces of his crew. Human, remnant, even standing at the tactical station, its alien features somehow looking determined. "This is what we were born for, all of us. This is the moment when the galaxy changes forever. Make it count." The fleet surged forward. The Throne Mind threw everything it had at them. Thousands of warships, defensive platforms armed with weapons that could crack moons, living missiles that screamed as they flew. It was the full fury of a god fighting for its life. But the god was afraid. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Throne Mind was afraid. The battle unfolded across the entire system. Human ships fought with the reckless courage that had become their signature. Remnant vessels targeted critical infrastructure with weapons that had been waiting for this moment. Defectors guided the attacks, knowing exactly where to strike. Captain Santos led in one final assault. Their target was the primary neural node on the largest planet, the center of the Throne Mind's consciousness. If they could destroy it, the entire network would collapse. "This is it, people," she said as her squadron approached the planet. "The big one, no retreat, no surrender, just one last crazy run." Her co-pilot, a young man who had lied about his age to join the military, looked at her with eyes that had seen too much death. "Captain, what do we do if we actually survive this?" Santos laughed. It was a good laugh, full of life and defiance. "Kid, if we survive this, I'm going to find the biggest bar on Earth and not leave until I forget what it looks like. You're buying." They hit the atmosphere at full speed. Defense platforms tried to intercept them, but they were too fast, too crazy, too determined. They punched through the planetary defenses like a knife through paper. The neural node rose from the planet's surface like a mountain of living tissue. It pulsed with dark energy, billions of neural connections firing simultaneously. The throne mind's primary brain. Santos aimed her ship directly at it. "Tell my kids their mom loved them," she broadcast, "and tell that their monster just met something scarier." She was supposed to die. Every calculation said she would die. The defenses were too strong, the approach too dangerous, the mission too insane. But Santos had spent her entire career doing impossible things, and she wasn't done yet. At the last second, she released her payload, a massive bomb carrying Doctor's virus in concentrated form. Then she pulled up, her ship screaming with the strain, and somehow, impossibly, escaped the explosion that followed. The neural node began to die. The virus spread through the throne mind's consciousness like fire through dry grass. Connections that had been stable started to fail. The god of the galaxy was having a stroke. And it was angry. The throne mind's death throes were terrible. It lashed out with everything it had left. Ships were destroyed. Soldiers died by the thousands. The very fabric of space seemed to tear as ancient weapons activated in desperate fury. Admiral Kern watched from the bridge of the Defiance as the battle reached its climax. They were winning, but at a cost that would haunt humanity forever. Every victory came with a price tag written in blood. Then the throne mind did something unexpected. It stopped fighting. The remaining ships went still. The weapons fell silent. And a voice spoke, not through communication channels, but directly into the minds of every conscious being in the system. The voice of a god in its final moments. "You cannot kill me. I am eternal. I will return. I will consume you all." Kern felt the words pressing against his thoughts, trying to find fear, trying to break his will. "I have existed for 12,000 years. I have consumed civilizations beyond counting. You are nothing. You are insects. You cannot end me." The pressure increased. Crew members fell to their knees, clutching their heads. Even staggered, its former connection to the hive mind making it vulnerable. But Kern stood firm. "You're wrong," he said, speaking aloud even though he knew the throne mind could hear his thoughts. "You've spent 12,000 years thinking you were the most powerful thing in the galaxy, and maybe you were, but power isn't everything." He walked to the main viewport and stared at the dying god. "You never understood us. You saw our weakness and thought it made us prey, but our weakness is our strength. We die, we fail, we lose the people we love, and we keep going anyway. That's what makes us human. That's what makes us unstoppable." He turned to his helm officer. "All ahead full. Target the primary consciousness cluster. We're ending this." "Sir, that's a suicide run. There's no way to." "I know." Kern looked at his crew one last time. "Get to the escape pods, all of you. That's an order." They didn't want to leave. He could see it in their faces, but they were soldiers. They obeyed orders. "All except." "I told you I would fight with you until the end," the defector said. "I meant it." Kern nodded. "Then let's show them what we're made of." The Defiance accelerated toward the heart of the throne mind. The dying god tried to stop them, but its coordination was failing. Its weapons missed. Its defenses crumbled. Kern thought about his son. Everyone who had died fighting this war. Everyone who would live because of what happened today. "This is for all of them," he whispered. The Defiance hit the consciousness cluster at full speed. The explosion was visible from every planet in the system. A new sun, burning for just a moment, then fading into darkness. The throne mind died. For the first time in 12,000 years, they experienced complete silence. The voice that had guided them, controlled them, defined them, was gone. Billions of warriors stood frozen, their minds suddenly empty. Some went mad, some simply collapsed, but many, freed from the collective for the first time in their existence, looked around with new eyes. They saw the devastation their species had caused. They felt something the throne mind had never allowed: shame. The war was over. 50 years later, the galaxy was a different place. The Galactic Accord governed hundreds of species working together. Former slave worlds rebuilt their civilizations. Trade routes connected planets that had once been isolated by fear. And humanity, they had become something unexpected, not conquerors, not rulers, but teachers, guides, the species that had shown the galaxy that even the darkest night could end. On a rebuilt world that had once been a slave colony, a school stood in the center of a new city. Inside, a human teacher named stood before a classroom of children from 12 different species. They were with their silver skin, remnant crystalline beings who sparkled in the light, even young, freed from the collective, learning what it meant to be individuals. Today, said, pointing to a holographic image of Earth, we're going to talk about what happened 50 years ago, about how the galaxy changed. A young raised a clawed hand. Its movements were awkward, still learning how to function without the hive mind. Teacher, the other students say humans are the greatest species in the galaxy now. Is that true? Smiled, it was a warm smile, full of kindness and a little sadness. No, she said, we're not the greatest. We never were, we were just stubborn. When everyone else gave up, we didn't. Not because we were brave or strong or special, but because giving up wasn't in our nature. She looked at her students, the future of a free galaxy. They asked us after the war what made humanity different, why we fought when everyone else ran, why we smiled at death, why we never stopped. She paused, remembering Admiral Kern, Captain Santos, the millions who had died so these children could live in peace. We told them the truth. We were never special. We were never chosen. We were just too stubborn to know when we'd lost. And sometimes that's enough. She smiled at her students. Sometimes that's everything. Outside the window, ships from a dozen species flew through a clear sky. Children who would never know fear played in streets where their grandparents had been slaves. And somewhere in the stars, the spirits of those who had fallen watched over a galaxy they had saved. Humanity had done the impossible, not through superior technology or perfect strategy, but through something simpler, the refusal to give up, the stubborn, irrational, beautiful determination to keep fighting even when all hope was lost. That was the nature of humanity. And that was why the galaxy's most feared species had finally found their match.